think the term mental health gets bandied around and not necessarily understood, or different people have different ideas of what that means. But in the football environment, people hide it. A lot of wearing of masks, pretending to feel or be something that isn't authentic. Well, so if you understand yourself, you get to understand other people. If you understand yourself, it is empowering, it's self-empowering. Understanding other people, you become an empowerer. But you can't do one without the other. You can't be everything to everyone. And I think a lot of head coaches now are trying to be everything to everyone because they think that's what they need to do.
Hello, coaches. Welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Big one this week. We are joined by Parris, emotional welfare specialist working in professional football, founder of The Changing Room and Simply Human, and also spent 8 years working at Brighton as education, welfare, and player services manager. I've followed Sue's work online for a few years now. She's doing some outstanding work in this area. There's a lot of reflection here, I think, for coaches as leaders. How much do we know about this area? Is it good enough to say once a year it's good to talk? Do we need to know more? Do we need to do more? And as Sue says, prevention is better than intervention. Powerful insight. I think you'll love this one. Please give it a like. Please make sure you subscribe. Here is Sue. Enjoy.
Sue, thanks so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Really excited to chat.
It's good to be here. Thank you for asking me to join.
No, it's I mean, I've seen your posts, and it's something that we had a quick chat off air there about the landscape. I think it's something that, you know, obviously a lot of players and people are struggling. I think a lot of leaders are struggling in this area. We have a lot of coaches and directors, they listen to the podcast. So you're an emotional welfare specialist in professional football. So the first question I wanted to ask was, how would you define emotional welfare at the elite level?
Great question to start. Let's get some clarity around it. Well, I think for me, emotional welfare is very much about exploring and providing a space, an environment, a culture that's emotionally congruent and emotionally safe for elite players or staff, or whoever in that environment, in that culture, to thrive. So in order to thrive, you need to feel safe, you need to feel a sense of trust, you need to feel able to be yourself, so authentic, and then to be um, embraced as yourself. So not feeling that you need to hide or to mask up, because that's exhausting. Yeah, to kind of feel valued. As soon as we feel valued, as soon as we feel that we are part of the bigger picture and valued for that, we can then thrive. So the emotional welfare is very much about creating that safe space, whether that is within the individual or within the environment and the culture.
I told you I did some research on the interview you did with Pitch Side Perspective, and I always try not to repeat questions that I hear in other interviews, but you gave a really good insight into your definition of mental health and why, not that you don't like the term, but again, clarity around that there. And I thought, wow, I had never heard this before. Would you mind kind of going over that again?
Yeah, of course. It's probably a good place to start, really, isn't it? Because I think the term mental health gets bandied around, and not necessarily understood, or different people have different ideas of what that means. So for me, in my work and from my understanding, mental health is something that we all live in all of the time, a bit like physical health. And we live that on a continuum. So we can go up and down the continuum between thriving, um, to existing, surviving, to then maybe, being, I suppose you could class it as being injured, and then to being ill. And we can go up and down this continuum daily, hour by hour, month by month, whatever that is. But the point being that mental health is used as a phrase that is synonymous with mental ill health, and it isn't. Mental health is something that as a human being we all live in all of the time. And that can be good, bad, indifferent, but it can also be crisis, it can be illness as well. So when we understand that emotions and feelings are a natural part of showing up in life, it's easier to meet those emotions and understand them and then be able to regulate them, and do that for ourselves. So once we understand that and have those types of insights, it becomes more manageable, and less frightening.
Let's get stuck into the kind of crisis we're all seeing and experiencing today. Your work at Brighton, and something you said that I thought was really interesting. You said that around, get this right, 2016, 2017, you started to see a concern with the emotional crisis in young men. So when you started at Brighton, I think it was 2012, and now that's what, 13 years ago, and you're looking at 16, 17. So in the midpoint, you saw this was starting to be a crisis. What did you see in your experience, or what did you experience that was kind of shifting towards this is something that is not moving in the right direction?
Well, I don't think it's something that appeared around then. I think it's always been there, but I think I started noticing a lot more of what lie underneath the day-to-day performance, and I'm not talking about on the pitch performance. I mean performance, um, of someone coming into work, which is basically, what our players do. I don't like the word player, but I'll go with it for the time being. Um, and I think because I'd by then been there and established myself and, kind of like developed these relationships within the space that I was working in, a lot more of the young men started coming to me and talking about how things really were for them, or hinting at that or alluding to that. Or I would notice something that, I don't know, just kind of, I would have an emotional shift in me thinking, "Well, actually, that doesn't seem right." And I think from my background of working with young people for many, many years, almost 30 years now, um, in environments before, it was a lot more obvious because it wasn't hidden. But in the football environment, people hide it because they're worried or they're frightened about how people view them and what kind of impact that then has on them playing the next game, being picked for the next squad, being offered the next contract. So there's a lot of hiding, there's a lot of wearing of masks, pretending to feel or be something that isn't authentic. So around, yeah, that 2016, 2017, it kind of came quite clear to me that, well, hang on a minute, we really need to have some kind of strategy in place that meets this, that addresses this as a really serious need. Because also around that time we had a couple of crises occur as well. So we had a planned suicide. Um, we had, a very serious eating disorder that came to, my attention, and, some anxiety and et cetera. So it was almost like all of this was bubbling up because the lid couldn't be held anymore for these individuals. Um, so for me, it was a case of, right, we really need some kind of strategy in place to meet this, to address it, but also to provide some prevention mechanism that these individuals don't need to wait until they're in crisis for them to get what it is they need in order to not reach that point, if you see what I mean. So a lot of the work that I did at that time with the strategy was very much around education, training, bringing a counselor in, um, and recognizing equally that a lot of the individuals, even with all of that in place and being open and addressing the stigma around what mental health is and isn't, that a lot were still not in a place where they could open up. So we had to look at, well, okay, so what can we do outside of that environment as well? How can we signpost for those that don't want to disclose within that environment as well?
The more I look at football environments, and again, partly as a fan and partly then with work, they are extremely dysfunctional environments at the best of times. Where you mentioned there about being judged and evaluated, you're also obviously by the coaches to pick a team, but there's a hierarchy and a food chain in most dressing rooms that you need to be accepted by to carry you through a career. See, when you're in that, again, dysfunctional, massive rates of judgment and trying to be accepted, and you said their mask, and I could see that you have to wear a mask to try and get that accept, especially when you don't know yourself at 16, 17. With social media and this kind of amplifying of image and self, that's how much do you think that has added to the youth of around, because I'm thinking around 2016, 2017, 2018, maybe there was a turning point, maybe there wasn't. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, social media is there's definitely an element that adds to the pot, if you like. So there's a social media is definitely an element of that. And when I was at Brighton, we were very, very aware of that. So we had a project which was part of the mental health strategy, whereby we had an amazing company in called Athlete Angel, who did all of the training for all of the ages around social media. They monitored the boys and girls and men and women accounts in order to not to spy on them, but to support kind of so that it would arise. So we have things like people's accounts being copied and used. We had people being stalked. We had, the hate of, I mean, that's an obvious one, but we also had a lot of the younger ones being manipulated and coerced into online behavior as well. So it was really important for us to kind of, again, meet them where they were. 'Cause it's all very well saying, "Oh, well, let's just take them all off of social media." Well, okay, my generation may well think that, but that isn't, how they see it. They live a lot of their social life online. It's really important to young people. So it was really important for us to kind of look at, well, how can we make that safer? How can we mitigate the risk of these, very serious interactions that are going on? So the monitoring was part of that in alerting us to issues. And as well, head of welfare, as part of my role at that time, for me, it gave me the heads up when somebody wasn't quite right. It was often like, the first indication that might be reported to me that something wasn't quite right with, say, I don't know, Jack, because he may well have, been antagonized into, replying to a comment, or he may have posted something along the lines that, you know, that he wasn't particularly happy or whatever. So what that did was it gave me information, and a heads up to actually call Jack and say, "How you doing? Everything okay? What's going on in your world at the moment?" So to instigate that chat that I wouldn't necessarily have had any indication that there was anything wrong with Jack, because Jack comes in with his mask every day. But on social media, there were times that, Jack would be displaying behavior or feelings that he wouldn't if he was on the premises. So social media, it's double, isn't it? It's double-edged sword really, because of course there are concerns and worries about it, but also it's really useful in understanding and getting to know the people that you have a duty of care over too. So we kind of tried to use both sides of that in order, again, as I've said before, to meet those young people where they were, rather than expecting them to live up to what I believe they should be doing, or the club believe they should be doing, or their coaches believe they should be doing. A lot of coaches are like, "Oh, well, just come off it, just ignore them." But that's not relevant for that generation. So we have to really kind of use our empathy in addressing a problem that can also help us find a solution as well. So yeah, Athlete Angel were amazing. And worked with them for many, many years at Brighton, and it was a really successful project in embracing social media, but also using it um, in a really important way as part of our duty of care.
Hello, coaches. We'll take a quick break here. As always, thank you so much for your support on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. If you're not aware, our Modern Soccer Coach Insider platform is about 6 weeks old. We've had over 100 coaches join it so far. It's our new membership platform where members get access to all the Modern Soccer Coach webinars that we've done throughout the years, and there's a lot of them. They get them available on demand. We have new exclusive content that's uploaded regularly on the platform, and also new webinars, new session plans. And then we also have a private coaches WhatsApp group that we put out more information and try to get a little bit more feedback about our future content as well. So it's a great community. I really appreciate all the coaches that have jumped on and signed up. I will put the link below. If you enjoy the work at Modern Soccer Coach, if you want to support the work at Modern Soccer Coach, this is a great way to do it. Modern Soccer Coach Insider, thanks so much for the support. Link is below. Back to Sue.
Vulnerability. All right, that's a big topic. See how to approach this. So you've posted some brilliant stuff. Is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this interview. The stuff you posted on vulnerability, and especially men's vulnerability, has been really, really powerful. We had Anthony McCann on here last year, who's a specialist in, so was ADHD, and um
Yeah.
and in Northern Ireland, working with clubs and coaches and the federation. He said that, in basic terms, don't be vulnerable at a football club because it's such a dysfunctional environment that you're gonna, I think his quote was, if they don't get them a ticket for the circus, if they don't want one, don't let them in, put the mask on for the day, get home. I know you're not gonna agree with that there, but I wanna get I wanna get your thoughts on like, it is a hard, complex.
I don't disagree with that. I understand where that comes from. Because being vulnerable, particularly for a man, young man or a boy, is is not their norm because of the conditioning of society, particularly Western society. We condition boys to be tough, to not cry, to hide how they really feel, to man, all the cliches. So I don't disagree with what you've just said, but I don't know that it's useful either. So it's about, okay, so and it also depends on the individual and the environment. So not all football clubs are the same. And like not all schools are the same, or not all universities are the same. Not all sports are the same. However, what we're talking about is a male environment. And a male environment will have certain characteristics to it that makes vulnerability very difficult. It makes it difficult to be vulnerable in that environment, and it also makes it difficult to meet anyone that is being vulnerable, because there's a real misunderstanding of what vulnerability is and how you support it. And this is one of the shifts, this is one of the paradigm shifts that I believe needs to happen, particularly in academy football, because we're working with children and young people, and vulnerability or feeling safe to be vulnerable is a really important part of what we need to develop our self-esteem, our value, and our emotional intelligence, which at the end of the day are the basis for how we then interact with each other on a daily basis, and then how we form relationships going forward as well. Um, so I understand why that would be said, and that might be appropriate for a certain individual in a certain environment, because there might not that vulnerability might not be met in a very healthy way. Um, so yeah, putting a mask on it and wait until you get home into a safe space where you can express that vulnerability and it be met with what you need, rather than express it in an environment that is toxic and it be derided or used against you, which will then close down your want and ability to be vulnerable in the future. So I don't disagree, but it's one of the things that is really important to acknowledge, that we don't, in these environments, these very male environments, on the whole, mostly don't know what to do when somebody is able to be vulnerable, particularly young people. So we have to be really careful about what is not a black and white thing at all. It's not an either or. You know, there are real nuances around this, which is why it's really important to understand child and adolescent growth and development. It's really important to understand emotional intelligence, and mostly, if you're somebody working and supporting that environment, is also really important to have your own self awareness. So, really, to understand yourself and what triggers you and how you behave in certain situations, and be able to own that behavior and then work through that. So, it's not just about the children and young people, it's about the people that create the culture, because that's where it comes from. So there's an awful lot of work to be done in those environments.
I really like that answer. It's complex, very complex.
Yes.
Whenever you're and to try and focus for a few minutes on the on those coaches, kind of middle management really, because they've got bosses as well, and they've got people who want a return on a team or a or an investment or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So they are under a bit of pressure when you are talking about emotional intelligence and self awareness in that where you're overworked, overrun, paying the mortgage aspect of it as well. Like, how would you advise someone who we all think that we are self-aware to a degree, and we all think that we're emotional intelligent in football today, and we're mostly not. And how would you say to for a leader at that youth team or first team, how would you say to not to tap in, but almost to work on regulating yourself or work on educating yourself? Where's the space to do that, do you see?
That's such a great question, and I'm not sure I've got the answer for that, but I've got some ideas around that. I think firstly, it's really important for anybody working in that environment, because that's what we're talking about. It's not just about this environment, but we'll keep it in this space, is to recognize that none of us are the finished model. You know, we are, it doesn't matter what age we are, we we spend a lifetime becoming. There's no happy ending, there's no end point where you can say, "Yep, that's me done. I'm pretty much there. I'm perfect," because 'cause we're not, and we never will be until, not even the day we die, or the day we pass, because as a human being, we are constantly developing. We are constantly learning about ourselves and about the environment and how the 2 interact, and that changes as well, as we go through different life phases. um, Different things become important to us, things shift, um, different people come in and out, we're triggered by different things, as we learn, etc. However, there's a thread that we can use that goes right the way through that, and for me, and certainly the work that I've done over the last however many years, it is to understand, the elements of emotional intelligence, and work on yourself, because that's the only thing you can control is yourself. You cannot control anybody else. So if you are constantly kind of battling, t burn out, exhausted, feel that you're fighting a never-ending battle, I would suggest, okay, the environment may well have something to do with that, but the main element is you. So go back to, where am I at? Where's my self-care? What are my expectations? What am I doing to support my growth? What's my perspective of what's going on? Am I making a lot of assumptions? Um, who who am I sharing this with? Where am I getting support from? What do I need to do to regulate what's going on for me? Because that's all we can ever really do at the end of the day. And if you're prepared to do that, and you're prepared to, really explore how you show up in the world and be honest about that, and then do the work that will become evident, things shift. They have to. And that for me is so important, because once you start doing that for yourself, you understand yourself, you get to understand other people. If you understand yourself, it is empowering, it's self-empowering. Understanding other people, you become an empowerer, but you can't do one without the other. Well, you can do the work on yourself, and then, you don't necessarily have to share that, but I think it's symbiotic in the sense that but that will happen anyway. You see what I mean? You can't help that. Does that make sense?
I think it's a brilliant answer. Brilliant answer. One of the I've just when you're talking there, I'm thinking, God, that's it's not that you make it sound easy, but I'm a big fan of processes. And I think the challenge with football, not even at professional level, I think just even at semi-elite level, if that's even a thing, whenever you start getting serious, when you realize you need to do that, you are in the you're in the crap. Like, you're in the middle of it, and mentally you're not in a great spot where you're like, I wish I had a started this at a time that again, maybe it's a stupid question, but not to say when should you start this, but I'm guessing that it is a healthier thing that when you're unpacking all of this, that you're not in a bad place, because then that's going to add more pressure to you to try and work it out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does completely, and, my answer to that, "When should you start?" would be yesterday.
Yeah.
That's part of, again, my approach when I was at Brighton, but also since through doing, work through my own company, is it's let's look at prevention. Let's not wait till we get to crisis. Let's do the work now. Let's be prepared that, things ebb and flow, things go up and down. As I said right at the beginning about, living in mental health all the time, we shift along that continuum. So if we have already got some really in-depth self-awareness through doing, I don't know, therapy, counseling, talking, reading, journaling, mindfulness, meditation, whatever that looks like, or a combination of all of those things, that when things inevitably start traveling along that continuum to dysregulation, we've already got heads up, because we're so in tune with what's going on for us through understanding our feelings and where we are with them, that we can prevent it from going any further. So the proactive approach is really important. Unfortunately, what I have found in working particularly with men and boys over the last 14 years is they're totally, not all, and not necessarily, I'm not talking, they either are or they aren't, but there's a disconnect for them about understanding what they're feelings are. So naming emotions is really difficult for boys and men. So that disconnection, it's really difficult for them to articulate where they are in how they feel. And I'm talking within the football space, but also outside of that as well. But let's stick to the football space. And that, as we've discussed, is down to many different reasons. But emotional literacy needs to be on the table in order then for young boys, young men, young people to be able to describe where they are, even if it's just to themselves. But in my experience, many young men I talk to have got three emotions: happy, sad, and angry. And beyond that, it's really difficult for them to name other emotions. Not It's not impossible, and it's like, once you start working in that space and, you start kind of talk, it becomes easier and easier. But on top of that, there's also the stigma of emotion. Yeah. So we need to kind of address that as well. So emotion is energy in motion. It's a natural thing for all humans to have, and it's energy running through the body. And it feels different depending on what that emotion is and where you feel it in your body, um, how it manifests. And if we're going to suppress that, that energy has to go somewhere. And slight tangent here, but a lot of the work that I've done, particularly with those that have repetitive injuries, because the emotion is not having an outlet anywhere. So that emotion is getting stuck in the body and it's causing damage, physical damage. That there is a definite relationship. There's loads of research around it, lots of theory around it, that a relationship between not expressing emotion and it getting stuck somewhere in the body and causing damage. So it's really important on every single level for this aspect of sport or football, of life, whatever, to be on the table and to not be stigmatized because it's part of who we are.
I was at back home a couple of weeks ago, and I picked up a newspaper in Dublin. There was an interview with the actor Brendan Gleeson, and he was talking about a new play he was doing. It was set in a bar, and he was talking about how for how many years that basically two guys sitting in a bar in Ireland was their kind of therapy. But no one would, they wouldn't say anything. They would nod about the horses and the football, have a couple of sips, put a bet on, but they wouldn't actually talk about feelings. And it feels so, I was reading it and then obviously reflecting and thinking, how much progress have we made? And I think of this sometimes with a lot of departments in football, like, oh, wow, now we are having these conversations but yet when you said there, happiness, sadness, anger, I still think that you'd rarely, to go back to kind of get a question out of this, you said in the interview with on the pitch side perspective, you said that the best thing that men can do is talk, but then also, does it matter that do they have to talk about, are you challenging or provoking? Listen, get beyond talking about horses and football and what you're doing and talk about feelings. Is that what you're saying, or is just talking about anything good enough?
Interesting. I would come back and say, yeah, I mean, talking in general is obviously good, but if you don't talk about how you feel, how do you apply any meaning or understanding to what that is? Um, if you're going to avoid talking about how you feel, if you're going to pretend you don't feel, or dismiss not feeling, or feeling, having those challenging feelings, how are you ever going to dissipate that energy? So, yes, talking about how you feel is a really important aspect of healing, important aspect of prevention, and a really important aspect of them being able to hold space for someone else to talk about how they feel and feel comfortable with that.
Is that where you come in then on that education side to try and because like even I'm just thinking, God, I would be petrified of doing that to someone as an employee to employ peer to peer. Like that would be
Yeah.
really, really tough. When you go into clubs and you facilitate that there, what does that education look like?
So there's different aspects to this. So one of the reasons I came away from being within a club to working outside a club is because I recognised that there are an awful lot of people that didn't want to disclose within that environment, even though whatever they said to me was confidential. Barring the caveats of putting yourself in danger or someone else, etc. Um, so it for me, it became clear that it was necessary for someone or for me to be able to come away from that environment and offer the space as a neutral space away. Um, and that is part of what you've just said in that, opening up to a peer, to somebody that you work with, or somebody that else that's employed in that position within a club is that's not the answer. For some might feel comfortable doing that, but how deep are they gonna realistically go? We talk about sports psychology a lot. For me, sports psychology is very different to what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the very baseline of being who we are and being able to express who we are in an honest and open way in order to be able to um, thrive in that uniqueness and be able to develop that uniqueness for your benefit and the benefit of people around you. Sports psychology, to me, and this is only my perspective, is much more about the on the pitch performance. It might include, I don't know, bits of CBT that tools to do stuff like that, or whatever. But I think we need to recognize that if you really want someone to be open and honest and really get to the crux of what's going on for them, they have to feel safe. And we have to accept that any working space is not necessarily where an employee, because that's basically what we're talking about, is going to feel safe talking about their deepest, darkest feelings, fears, emotions, worries, um, hopes, dreams. Are you really gonna do that at work? Probably not. I don't think I would. And, this is my space, but I want to feel safe. I want to feel that whatever, um, any kind of, I don't know, regrets I might have or things that I'd like to go kind of explore that I might have said or done in the past, or how I feel about something or someone or a situation. I want to do that, explore that in a very safe space where I know it's not going to go any further. And where I know I'm not going to be judged, I'm not going to be criticized, I'm not going to be told what to do, because that's not part of it either. It's about being able to explore that with someone else who can hold that space for you in such a way, grounded in empathy, non-judgment, um, that you are able to work it out for yourself. Because that's ultimately what we all want, isn't it? Is to be able to work it out for yourself. But we need help doing that. We need to feel supported. And then the more that you become familiar with that and can trust that, the more open you become going forward. And then the more you are then able to support other people doing the same thing. So it's that ripple effect, very much that ripple effect.
Let's stay on the topic of organization structure around this here. W- we're seeing that now football clubs are becoming corporations, and that has extended into how they are communicating and position themselves as brands, which has extended into, hey, we look after our people, that's looking at retention or our social media posts. For you, in your mind, like when you go in, because anyone can put a post up and do that. When you go into an organization, and you feel that, yeah, this is actually, they're actually doing what they say they're doing here. How would you gauge that? What were some things you would look for?
It's not even about the organisation knowing that, is it? It's about the people. How are those people experiencing that? Um, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because again, it's like, all right, so you have someone go in and you do an audit, let's say. So you go in and you ask the under 21s, right, how do you feel the club looks after you? How do you feel the club addresses worries that you might have? There's still a mistrust about where's this information going? How do I know you're not going to tell so and so? Oh, I'm going to say this. How do you? It, I it's just a really difficult thing to do. I think the way that you would assess it, the way that you would know whether that was being met is by the culture that was created. I don't think it's something that is necessarily tangible. I think it's more to do with how are individuals thriving. um, what does the performance look like on the pitch? Because ultimately, that's the end goal, isn't it? If you've got a group of young men who feel they're being judged all the time, they're being watched, they're being pulled up for things that that they don't feel is fair. If you've got stress, if they feel, I mean, there's enormous pressure on these young men to perform, consistently at a level that uh, seems impossible, really, from the outside looking in. But if all of those things, it comes out in the performance. I watched a match last week of a team that I was asked to look at because I'm going to be working with a few of their young men. Um, and the first 40 minutes, say, um, almost up to half time, all I saw was fear. I don't want the ball. I'm not going to be in a position where I'm going to be past the ball. I don't want to make a mistake. Everything was, I mean, I've got a slight advantage. I used to play football myself on and off for 20 years, so I kind of I get it. And I loved playing. I was also married to a professional footballer as well. Football's been a big part of my life anyway, so I can read a football match from an emotional perspective because of the work that I do. So the fear that was displayed, particularly around 5 or 6 of them, was really clear, and it wasn't until they were 1-0 up that all of a sudden it was almost like the shoulders went down. "Oh, okay, so we've got a little bit of leeway. Right, now I can do this, now I can go here, now I can," because we've got that little bit of a buffer. It ended up 1-1, I think, at the end of that particular match, but the first 40 minutes, easily the first 40 minutes all you could see was fear. That's all that was going on. Couple of the older, players, maybe not so, and they were getting frustrated because they could sense that as well. So, and when I spoke to one of the coaches, he said, "Well, I totally get and I agree, and I could see that myself, etc., etc." He said, "You would never believe how different a training session is." So, "What do you mean?" He said, "Oh my God, we are shit hot in training. They look like a different group of young men in training." But you change the dynamic, you change the dimensions, you change the environment, you put, 3 points at stake, and all of a sudden, they're like rabbits in the headlight. So that's individual work that needs to be done there, and possibly some group stuff as well. I can't remember what the question was now.
Yeah, I was actually watching the Roberto De Zerbi documentary on Marseille this week, and they were having a performance psychological challenge with at home at the velodrome, and it's interesting. Like I thought they showed more than maybe a US or British version would show, and he took them to an off site training base, and they went through values and put 25 values up on the board,
25 values.
and there might have been 21. Yeah, yeah.
A
Uh,
lot.
it's a lot, but it's part of, like, I don't know, I'm a bit cynical and I love De Zerbi, so, like, it doesn't take much for me to get behind something, but when you're going away for a with a high profile figure for 2 days and you come back and you win and you say, "Listen, we've cracked it. We keep it going." Rashford, I just saw a snippet of Rashford's interview with Gary Lineker and Mika Richards, and he said that Mourinho, after he only cared about the result when you won and you knew you had deficiencies in your performance, he didn't talk about them, but they came out when you lost. And I battle whether that's actually good coaching or not. It's a very outcome driven, but then if you go at it from which a lot of these environments do, like everything's picked up on, everything's measured, not just from a technical standpoint, but as you know, like the science is adding layers of feedback to it. It's just a lot.
It is a lot, and you could see the reasons why, but if you haven't got the foundation right underneath all of that and understand the person and how they receive that information, how they interpret that information. Do they take it personally? What kind of feedback delivery do they need? Do they need to feel that you care about them, or does actually that doesn't come into them, come into their psyche? And I think, you hear a lot about, okay, so we know our players better now. We really get to know them and we do this and we do that, but they're still the coach. So there's still a power dynamic there. There is still that power relationship where that individual will only tell that coach what they think they want to hear and know, um, and what won't change how they think about them, if you see what I mean. So they want to be seen in a certain way in order to play as many matches and be in the squad and, have the opportunities, etc., etc. And as soon as that relationship feels wobbly for whatever reason, it might be oversharing or it might be a poor performance or some blame or whatever, or a new player comes in that is the all singing, all dancing, and now you're not. There are so many nuances around how we create, develop, manage, and live relationships, and they change all the time. They're not static, like we're not static. So we have to work at them. But you have to know right from the start, well, what is the relationship? Well, it's player coach. Okay, so therefore, player coach relationship will have a certain dynamic to it, and there are boundaries to that. So you need other people around that individual. You can't be everything to everyone, and I think a lot of head coaches now are trying to be everything to everyone because they think that's what they need to do. But even in a family, as a parent, you're not gonna be everything to every child, for example. You're gonna relate to them in different ways, which is why, you have other adults. It takes a village to raise a child. Let's use a cliche. Um, and the reason you need a village to raise a child or to develop a young person or to support people getting to where they can get is because each individual needs different things from different people at different times. You can't bring somebody up successfully in an echo chamber. So if you've only got similar types of people with similar types of perspectives inputting into the development of an individual or a team, how are you going to how are you going to cope when something that those people have never experienced or understood themselves occurs? That's I mean, I come back to gender within football. not that I've mentioned it today, but I have in other podcasts, is that there are very few, and I'm not talking there are very few older women within football at the levels that they need to be in order to provide what an older woman's perspective. I'm on dodgy ground here. An older woman's perspective in that nurturing base of what's going on for those. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need them in the football club, but let's have people. I mean, it could be, I say it could be mum or auntie or whatever, but there's a conflict of interest there. There's a conflict of interest of anyone in the family position of that person because you're gonna be biased, of course you are. But I think there's real value in understanding that different people outside of that echo chamber in football, the value that somebody else can bring to the table on that level. And you might say, "Well, you would say that because you're an older woman in football," but I know the value that I bring into that space, and I know how to meet certain situations that people are experiencing from all the different perspectives and experience that I've had over the last however many years. So, yeah.
I love that. You can't be everything to everyone. Um, and I think coaches today, again, I would have a lot of sympathy to, or at least empathy to coaches today, because I do think there's a pressure to know everything tactically. Like, you've got to be up at the terms and everything that's going on. You got to know science, because if you don't, you're going to be criticized for being a dinosaur that injures players. You gotta be the cool person. Like, that's why I think all the coaches wear the same clothes with the shoes. Every coach wears the same shoes. And like, you gotta be the cool, trendy one. Now Pep's brought that in. And you gotta be the player's friend. But like you said, the power dynamic of that is, if you're trying to be their friend, and it's like, you can't really do that, right?
No, no, because there's a boundary that needs to be in place. You're not there to be a friend, yeah? You're there to nurture, to develop, to protect, to care for, to provide safety, etc. You're not there to be a friend, and I think I've certainly experienced in football a lot of people whose agenda for being in football is really questionable. Because it's football. Oh, I'm in football, and I'm so and so's mate, and I know. You just you have to be really careful about crossing those lines. And it's the same in, I mean, use example of teaching if you like. You can be friendly and you can provide that that nurture, but there are boundaries to that. There are very strict boundaries to that, 'cause it's not just about protecting those individuals, it's also about protecting yourself. And I think there's a lot of blurring in boundaries at times. But I come back to, well, that's why doing the work on yourself and understanding yourself and your agenda and your wants, your needs, and knowing how to meet them is a really important part of the process. If you want a process, you say you're very process driven, well, go through the process yourself first. And then you understand where someone else might be or might be stuck in the process, and therefore signposting or referring them to someone who can help them to the next stage becomes clearer, and more obvious and more useful, because we can't do it for everybody, and you do get coaches, physios, player care, whatever, who get really precious about individuals. Who's that for? And we have to be honest with ourselves. Is that for me or is that for them? So we have to keep coming back to here. We have to keep checking back. Well, why am I doing that? Who's that for? Is that realistic? Whose agenda am I playing to here? And it's not, and we don't always get it right. Even when you know that and see that, you still won't get it right all the time. And the worst thing to do is to not own it. Is to say, do you know what? Hands up. I got caught in that. So next time I really need help identifying this. But again, coming back to how we condition boys and men is to not admit they made a mistake. Cognitive dissonance is something that's worth looking at, in that realm of, never admitting a mistake or a failure or an error. How can we learn if we don't embrace that? None of us are infallible. Yeah, none of us are infallible. We all make mistakes.
Last one for you. When you put together a a I think it was 2016 to Brighton presented the strategy of how to take care of this. Well, what you're saying there is, again, am I correct in thinking that the strategy would be the education, the support, the review, the constant checking in of that, of all these components to it? Is that kind of where a club has to get to be effective in this area?
Well, I think there are different elements or different stages. It depends where a club currently is, how serious are they about it? Are they willing to own what's currently happening? Is there buy-in? Um, are they ready to really examine and explore? Are they ready for the honesty? How are they going to create that environment in order for people to be honest? I mean, the way I originally looked at it, I did it as a kind of like there were three main elements. There was the education training, because how can you address something that people don't understand? So introducing the different squads and different staff to, well, what is mental health? Going back to what we spoke about right at the start. Well, if everyone thinks mental health is something different, well, then how do you evolve that? You can't, because people are all over the place. So there has to be an agreement around what it is you're looking at. And then the training, the education around that has to be age appropriate. It has to be context appropriate. It has to address any current failings or concerns, because what we're doing is we're trying to protect people here. We're trying to create an environment where somebody can develop safely and trust that. I mean, there's lots of different elements. So there's that initial training and education. So everybody's on the same page. So, right, okay, this is what it is. We understand that. Okay, so how now do we do the preventative piece of work? Because ultimately, we don't really want anyone to come to emotional crisis, do we? Because, why would we allow someone to get to that point? So if we all now understand what this is, what do we need to put in place to provide what people need? And there will be several different things in that, because one size doesn't fit all. So what do we need as an organization, as a club, as a team, as a squad, as individuals, to prevent or to circumvent anybody getting to the point where they're in danger? That's the second piece. And then the third piece is, okay, we need to accept that some people will end up at emotional crisis for whatever reason, and we can go back and we can have a look at our failings on that and how we might address that differently next time, etc. But if we have anybody that meets that emotional crisis, what do we do then? What's how are we going to react? What are we going to do? What do we have in place? What things have we got to offer to keep that person as safe as possible? Now, I've just about to couple up with a rehab clinic in abroad, which I'm flying out there next week because it just looks amazing, and it's an addiction clinic. And I come across a lot of addiction in football, whether that is gambling, alcohol, sex, drugs, shopping, whatever. Um, And I don't want anyone to get to that point. But addiction is a process by which you have somebody suppressing challenging feelings or dealing with where they currently are emotionally so that they can keep going. So the addiction will, in some cases, be a crutch, if you like, to stop um, that becoming crisis. But however, obviously, addiction is also a spiraling process that only leads one way as well. So, and it's complex. I'm not trying to kind of be reductionist here either. But what I'm getting at is that at the end of, if you do the training, the education, you do the preventative stuff, you also need to have options when you will inevitably have individuals who those 2 stages, don't work for, or, they slip through, whatever. And what do they look like? Are they bespoke, or are they one size fits all? What is the offering there? How does it fit? Is it going to be enough? Blah, 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 blah. So signposting, referrals, meeting need, um, and meeting need very specifically within the football context is also really important. I'm hoping that I will never need to refer anybody out to this particular clinic. Um, that would be ideal, wouldn't it? But inevitably, it's going to be somewhere, and therefore I know that from my due diligence that that is going to be a safe haven for somebody that needs to be met at that point of where they are. And that's all we can do. I can't fix anybody. I can't cure somebody. They can only do that for themselves. But what are we providing for them in order for them to be able to do that for themselves? And that's another part of all of this that we've spoken about is we're not the savior in all of this. And I think that's where some people kind of, want to place themselves. Oh, I stopped them doing this or I saved them from that. We're not the savior. We're the conduit. But if you're going to be the conduit, then you need to understand along that conduit, along that process, what is needed and when is it needed. And that's where the come back to the emotional welfare specialist side of things is. But I don't do it alone. I don't do it alone. I call in people who, I know that have got a lot more expertise in certain areas than I will ever have. Um, yeah. God, this conversation can go on forever. I
Go
wonder
on
if
forever.
we didn't get hey, we didn't get
No, it will. Always open for a part two.
there.
Uh, so this has been amazing. I've learned a lot, and yeah, I'm really excited to have done it. Thank you so much, and thank you for what you're doing. I do think that it does need people like yourself who are challenging and provoking that every single day, and I think it's so important in our ecosystem. So thank you,
Very welcome.
and
If anybody kind of like, resonates with what we've spoken about, you can get in touch with me via LinkedIn. So Sue Parris with 2 R's, or I've got website, The Changing Room, Instagram, The Changing Room. Um, I've also just recently developed an emotional intelligence course in football for 15 to 18-year-olds. We're going to be doing that for coaches and for other age groups as well. So again, the preventative side of it is getting people to kind of understand themselves and know how to do that. So that's all online. It's a digital course. It's amazing. I'm so pleased with it. And then, yeah, the one-to-one work. So holding space for those that really feel that they need that. So, yeah, I wish I didn't have to do this type of work, but there we are. That's
yeah,
me.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Sue, thank you so much. Fantastic.
You're very welcome. Lovely to see you.